Welcome to FreeSBC, a new approach to the SBC, a webinar event hosted by TelcoBridges. As network architects and service providers and large enterprises plan their migration to the cloud infrastructure, one network security element plays a critical role and needs very special treatment: the session border controller. At the crossroads of real-time voice and video traffic, SBCs are tasked with providing protection against denial of service attacks, facilitating NAT traversal, providing topology hiding, and resolving interoperability issues, and much, much more. During a recent briefing with Greg Collins at Exact Ventures, he shared with us some observations and forecasts on the changes that he's seen in the session border controller market. One significant change is the shift from SBCs being physical appliances to virtualization and the deployment in cloud. According to his forecasts, by 2022, over 75% of SBC deployments will either be virtualized or cloud-based. And we think this is a significant change to the market and requires a change in business as usual. The traditional way of paying for network infrastructure assumed a hardware-centric appliance needed to be purchased, requiring a large upfront capital expenditure, followed by maintenance freeze over the life of the equipment. The result was front-loading of the total cost of ownership, or TCO, a real problem for providers that are just starting out and are trying to build a customer base. The new cloud way is much, much more software-centric, where the initial costs are low and increase later when a paid subscriber base is established by the provider. This model provides more opportunities for fostering new services and new applications, ideally growing new business opportunities. Recognizing these needs, TelcoBridges offers FreeSBC, a software SBC solution designed specifically for cloud and virtualized deployments. Highly scalable with carrier-grade reliability, FreeSBC is a commercial SBC offered under a freemium business model. We feel FreeSBC better fits the emerging cloud application market needs for an affordable voice security. Yeah, no, I know one of the areas I know a lot of folks have expressed interest in is about this discussion of the freemium business model. This obviously takes some explanation. So can you just share how does this work, and how is something free, and then what are some of the premium features?
Yes, for sure, I'll do that. So the freemium model is one where you can obtain, the major a product that supports the major functionality, but you can also pay to obtain some additional features or some premium features. And this is the way that we are offering FreeSBC. So you can obtain the core FreeSBC software for $0. You simply go to the FreeSBC website and you download it. And then if you do that, you support yourself using our online documentation on the wiki, and you also obtain some periodic updates of the software, whenever TelcoBridges adds new features, and we want to make it available to our FreeSBC users. But you also have the option to pay and to obtain some additional features and support. So if you do opt to pay for a FreeSBC, well, what you get is 24/7 access to our customer support engineers. You get regular updates of the FreeSBC software. You get access to 2 sets of additional features that you can use on FreeSBC. One's called TD Analytics, which is a set of troubleshooting tools, and the other one we're calling OSS BSS connectors, which allows you to interface FreeSBC with back office systems. Transcoding is also supported by FreeSBC, and the way transcoding is supported is through the purchase of hardware. We offer these transcoding devices that use voice over IP DSPs to handle the media, change codecs, change the way DTMF tones are transported, and so on. What telco, and in a few slides here, I'll be detailing, what is the really itemized list of what's the difference between the free version and the paid version. And I'm going to detail what are these TB analytics tools and OSS BSS connectors. But here I just want to add one last thing, is that we are also creating around FreeSBC an alliance partner program. And the idea of this alliance partner program is to bring to the table third-party solutions that complement FreeSBC, such as a billing solution, a fraud detection solution, a management solution, and so on. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail later.
Excellent. Well, one of the things I'm sure people want to dig into is, of course, a little bit more detail on the comparison between those two. And so we prepared this great little chart here.
Yeah, and let me talk to this slide a little bit. So what you see on this slide is a list of features on the left, and then you have two columns, free and paid. And what this slide is showing is what's included in the free version and what's included in the paid version. But I'm going to use this slide to make it very clear to everyone, right, that FreeSBC is a virtual session border controller software that you install on a computing platform. And whether you opt to use the free version or the paid version, you get exactly that. A carrier-grade SBC that functions as a back-to-back user agent, implements the security features that you're looking for, NAT traversal, you can manipulate SIP headers, it has an integrated call routing engine, you can limit call rates, you can limit the bandwidth on SIP trunks. It supports 1+1 configuration for high availability. And so in terms of SBC functionality, everything is included in the free version, as well as in the paid version. But if you do opt to pay, what additional functionality or what add-ons you get are at the bottom of this table, and they're in the last 4 rows here. Like I said, you get 24/7 access to our customer support engineers. Transcoding devices are payable. This is hardware that if you need to support transcoding, you need to purchase, and these transcoding devices are controlled by FreeSBC. And then finally, you get TB analytics, network troubleshooting tools, which I'll tell you more about later on. And you get some connectors or interfaces to interact with third-party systems that we call OSS BSS connectors, for example, to interconnect with a billing system or to interconnect with management systems. One thing that you should know is that if you do download, let's say, the free version, or you opt for the free version of FreeSBC, you do have the TB analytics features and the OSS BSS connectors on a trial basis for 90 days so that you can check to see if these can be useful for you.
Awesome. Well, I know one of the questions is does it perform? What kind of density, what kind of capacity does it have? So I think that based on some of the different system configurations, it'd be great to share some of the performance figures.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Let me describe this. So we wanted to show this slide to make it very clear to everyone what you can expect out of FreeSBC. And so this virtual session border controller software can be installed on a bare metal server or on a virtual computing platform or in the cloud. And what we're showing here is to give you an idea of performance, what you can get out of these different computing environments. So as the top row here is the maximum number of simultaneous calls or maximum number of concurrent sessions. And then a little below here, we have some numbers on call handling performance, completed calls per second and call attempts per second. And I think that most of you would agree with me that the performance figures are quite impressive. Of course, we get the best performance on a bare metal server, but the performance that we can get out of a VMware computing platform or OpenStack KVM are also impressive. And you see Alan, there are some footnotes here, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you go to the FreeSBC website to get the data sheet, what we explain is exactly on what computing platform we were able to achieve these numbers. And just for everybody's information, we run these performance tests. They're part of our regression tests in the lab. So you can be confident that if you do decide to use FreeSBC and you install it on a server or on a virtual machine, you will be able to get similar numbers.
Right. Well, very interesting. Okay, well, let's move on and let's start to talk a little bit about some of the use cases. I know you had prepared 3 different use cases here to share with everyone.
Yes, and so the first one is a use case for voice over IP peering. So what you see on this slide are 2 service providers represented by these 2 clouds. And in this scenario, the service provider on the right is interfacing or interconnecting with a wholesale voice over IP service provider. And so the one application for FreeSBC is for voice over IP peering, where we're showing here that FreeSBC is being used to interconnect these operators together. And what we're looking for in a session border controller that's used in an application like this is a large session capacity. And we just saw the numbers on the previous slide. We're looking for a session border controller that integrates call routing, SIP header manipulation, and has the ability to generate call detail records. And the FreeSBC is, in an application like this, is typically deployed on a server or on a virtual machine within the service provider's network. And the integrated call routing allows the service provider to control, where calls are sent, depending on typically the called telephone number, and sometimes also based on the calling telephone number. Alan, could you show the next use case, please?
Sure.
So this one is where FreeSBC is used in the access network. So what FreeSBC is being used for in this case is to secure the service provider's network, or secure the soft switch in the service provider's network. That is, to prevent it from being attacked for denial of service, or maybe registration scanning, or maybe just how would I say, just plain bandwidth, high bandwidth attack on the soft switch. So in an application like this, where FreeSBC is used facing small, medium-sized businesses or enterprises, we're looking for a session border controller that also has a large session capacity. We can imagine that this service provider may have thousands or tens of thousands of subscribers, or businesses it's providing hosted IPPBX services to, for example. We're looking for a session border controller that has a high performance, that is able to perform different types of NAT traversal. And we're looking for a session border controller that can not only pass through register requests, from IP phones in the access network to the soft switch, but also a session border controller that can maybe throttle such register requests, so that throttle register requests and refresh register requests, so that these do not overwhelm the the soft switch. And FreeSBC includes all of these functionalities, and that's why it's positioned as an access SBC as well as a peering SBC.
And I think the third case you wanted to share was about a contact center.
Yes, that's right. So the FreeSBC, because of its high performance, its high call handling performance, because it's able to limit call rates, it's able to limit the bandwidth used on certain SIP trunks. Also because it has an integrated call routing engine, which is very sophisticated. You know, for example, you can implement call routing based on calling and called telephone numbers. You can implement routing based on, you know, time of day, day of week. You can load balance calls on different SIP trunks or different providers. The FreeSBC is an ideal session border controller for contact centers. What we're showing here on this slide is a contact center that is using a dialer, for example, and that is placing call on the PSTN. And this contact center needs to route calls to different service providers depending on the called telephone number. For example, if the dialer is calling a mobile telephone number or a fixed line telephone number or a long distance telephone number, we want to be able to route the call to different service providers, and typically FreeSBC will route the call to the service provider that's offering the least cost for this route. And then, Alan, just a matter of detail, but it's important for contact center applications, is that the FreeSBC is able to map cause codes. So the idea here is that when the dialer is placing a call and that call doesn't succeed, it may succeed for different reasons. Maybe the number is not allocated, the number doesn't exist, the trunks were busy, or other reasons. That FreeSBC can be configured to map the incoming cause code from the service provider to another cause code towards the dialer. And this is really useful for contact centers who will make decisions. The dialer will make decisions based on the cause code, you know, to keep a telephone number on the list or to remove it, you know, for example, because the number does not exist.
Right, right. Well, I know that's important. So let's move on and talk about deployments. We've covered the use cases, so now we move on and talk about some of the different platforms that it can be deployed on. And I know there were some questions about this in the queue already.
Okay, so then I'll try to explain, you know, as clearly as possible in an attempt to answer the questions here in advance. So, like I said earlier, FreeSBC is a virtual session border controller. FreeSBC is software developed by TelcoBridges with, you know, a SIP stack that's been deployed since 2006. So the SIP stack is mature. TelcoBridges has full control over its SIP stack. And so this software that you download from the FreeSBC website can be installed on a bare metal server. It can be installed on a virtual computing environment such as VMware, OpenStack, or KVM. And it can also be installed in the cloud. The software that you download will be installed on these platforms, and as it installs, it will discover network interface cards, and it allow you to configure, at the very least, a LAN port and a WAN port, but you can have many gigabit Ethernet or 10 gig interfaces that can be controlled by FreeSBC. And once again, we showed performance numbers earlier. You will get the highest performance numbers out of a bare metal server, but you will still have very strong performance numbers out of a virtualized computing environment. And we have, I know that some people are concerned about you putting real-time communications on the cloud or on a virtual computer, but we have ways of configuring these computing platforms in order to get the most or the best performance out of these installations.
Right, right. And I know one of the questions that's been rolling around relates to some of the other virtualized environments, and probably one of the key things to share about the deployment model is the software image does include an embedded operating system, and it is completely turnkey, as Mark mentioned, so that even on a bare metal server, it comes with the embedded CentOS operating system.
Yeah, that's correct. And just to give the detail is FreeSBC runs over CentOS 7, and when you download the software, the CentOS 7 comes with the FreeSBC software.
Right, right. All right, let's dig into some specific features and capabilities. And you talked about some of the manipulation that FreeSBC can handle. So maybe we can just dig into a couple examples here.
Yeah, for sure. Just use this slide to make it very clear to everyone that FreeSBC, whether it's the free, you opt for the free option or for the paid option, you can manipulate SIP headers and you have access to the full SIP header. You can prepend or append digits to telephone numbers, calling or called telephone numbers. You can modify the privacy information in the SIP header. You can insert or remove custom SIP headers. And FreeSBC even supports SIP-I and SIP-T. It's used today for this SIP to SIP-I conversion, where some service providers are using TelcoBridges products to because they need to use SIP-I to interconnect with a specific service provider. And just briefly for everyone's benefit here is SIP-I, the I of SIP-I stands for ISUP, which comes from SS7 signaling. And the idea of SIP-I is to be able to transport SS7 signaling information elements that do not map well into SIP headers. And many service providers will find out that other service providers with which they may want to interconnect with will require the use of SIP-I or SIP-T, and FreeSBC is a solution for them.
Well, I know routing was part of the discussion you chatted about earlier, and there's a couple different models for routing. So this should be explained in more detail. So why don't you share how this works?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that the FreeSBC integrates its own call routing engine, and it's a class 4 call routing engine. So and there are different call routing methods within FreeSBC. The easiest one is what's called a static routing table, where you can configure for yourself a routing table that, for example, defines for incoming trunk groups with specific calling and called telephone numbers or prefixes or telephone numbers using wildcards. You will map that call to an outgoing call on another trunk group with or without digit manipulation. This static routing table can also implement percentage routing. So you can define that for a given route, a certain percentage of calls will go to a specific outgoing route and another percentage to another, and so on. You can also load share using the FreeSBC integrated call routing. You can, load share traffic on different soft switches, or load share traffic on different routes. Or, for example, if you had a conference server, FreeSBC could be put in front of the conferencing server. All of these call routing capabilities are integrated into FreeSBC, and they are included with the software. Now, what's more is that FreeSBC can also interface with external call routing servers, and we have alliance partners that offer such external call routing solutions. And the interfaces that are offered in order to do this there are two of them. There's SIP and there's Radius protocol. If you use the SIP interface, well then an incoming call to the FreeSBC will generate a SIP invite to the route server, and that route server will respond with, for example, a 302 redirect, and in the contact information and in that response, we'll find one or more routes instructing FreeSBC on how to route the call. And similarly, using Radius, it's just another protocol. But Alan, I'll just say one last thing here is because I'm talking about Radius here, and I want to make it clear that the Radius interface is only available in the paid version. But everything else that I've mentioned here on this slide is available in the free option of FreeSBC.
Right. So next, I think everything doesn't always necessarily go perfectly on a network, and sometimes networks need to be diagnosed. So maybe you could share with us a little bit of information about some of the network troubleshooting tools.
Yeah, for sure. And these are very cool tools. I'll first state right away that these network troubleshooting tools are integrated with FreeSBC, and they are available in the paid version only. These tools are called collectively TB Analytics, but they individually, they're called Call Trace, Test Call, Live Wireshark Capture, and Call Recording. I'll touch just a bit on each of them to explain, try to convey what the value is in these tools. So first of all, the Call Trace tool is one where FreeSBC retains in memory and on disk the information or the signaling information for historical calls. Using the Call Trace tool, which is embedded in the web interface to configure and manage FreeSBC, is a tool where you can search in these historical calls for a specific call you're looking for, and for which you want to see a ladder diagram with the signaling information and FreeSBC's call routing decisions on this call. And this troubleshooting tool is used every day by our customers, by our customer support engineers. And just as an example, you may, as a service provider using FreeSBC, you may have a customer that calling and said, yesterday my calls weren't getting through to Mexico. We tried all day and it just wasn't connecting. And then you can ask, okay, what number were you calling? When did you call? What time yesterday? Any information to help you search for the call, the historical calls that were made the day before using Call Trace, and then you can view the ladder diagram for these call attempts, and you can see if your customer is right, and you can troubleshoot if in fact, the calls weren't completing. You can find out why using the Call Trace tool. Now, briefly, moving on to the next troubleshooting tool is Test Call. This is an integrated tool within FreeSBC that allows the FreeSBC software to generate its own test call. And it's a real call that the FreeSBC will initiate. You can initiate an incoming call to FreeSBC, and you can initiate an outgoing call. If you place an incoming test call, well, you'll be testing the way FreeSBC will route that call, as well as the result of that call, on the outgoing trunk group. You can play tones. You can play pre-recorded audio using test call as well. And the value in this tool is really that when you're making configuration changes to the session border controller, you can do everything yourself. Alan, I don't need to have someone at the other end on the phone and say, okay, go ahead, make the call now, I'm ready. You can do it yourself, which saves a lot of time. It's very useful. And then the last troubleshooting tool I'm going to talk about is the live Wireshark signaling capture. So FreeSBC has the ability to capture SIP signaling, and it can stream this captured SIP signaling directly to a desktop where Wireshark is running, and you can view the signaling live on your desktop using this feature. Of course, you can also record this SIP signaling to disk in a PCAP file, and you can open it with Wireshark. But it's very useful to be able to view the signaling live when you're troubleshooting your network.
All right, so now I'm sure some folks have been waiting for the case study, and I think that this is an important proof point. And why don't you start out with just introduce real quick Marcatel and who they are and what their role in the industry is.
Yeah, sure. Marcatel is a service provider in Mexico. They're based in Monterrey, and their business is delivering voice services, delivering services to the enterprise market, also serving carriers. They have a wholesale business, a voice wholesale business as well, and they're also providing data connections as well all around the world.
And they had a very unique challenge. One of the issues that they were struggling with was with performance on their SIP trunks with customers that were overloading their SIP trunks. So maybe we can dig into that.
Yeah, for sure. So what was going on there at Marcatel with their voice service business with enterprises is that many of the enterprises they're serving are call centers or contact centers. And like we discussed a bit earlier, such contact centers have dialers, so they're making a very large amount, they're placing a very large amount of outbound calls on the PSTN via Marcatel's network. But even if they don't have a dialer, the call centers generate a lot of traffic, even if it's an inbound call center. Depending on their business, it's a high volume of traffic, and the calls can be of a short duration. So what was going on at Marcatel is that some of these call centers were generating a lot of traffic on their network, which is good, for business. But at the same time, the rate at which calls are sent to the network was overwhelming, and I think these call centers were exceeding the service level agreement. So their challenge was that they had to rate limit these calls in a graceful manner. They didn't want to just simply refuse calls. They wanted a solution to rate limit these calls gracefully and throttle the calls. The other challenge they had, they wanted to do this with a session border controller because, of course, they're delivering a SIP trunk to these call centers. The other challenge they had is well, they looked at other solutions, other virtual SBCs from other vendors, and they found it very difficult to install. And they found that the licensing was complex, and it required many steps in the installation. And Alan, they were just not satisfied with such solutions.
Right, right. And if I remember correctly, one of the issues was they had to go to one place to get the operating system, someplace else to get the image, and this just wasn't practical for their application. So and what they ended up deploying, they actually did it at the customer premises, and this is sort of an interesting story of what they finally put together using FreeSBC.
Yeah, that's right. So what they decided to do is, well, they are using FreeSBC, so TelcoBridges virtual session border controller software. They are installing it on bare metal servers, and depending on the traffic, they don't need a killer server with an unbelievable CPU and RAM and disk. A very affordable server will be able to serve their needs. And so what they're doing is installing FreeSBC on a bare metal server that they're purchasing off the shelf. And by the way, you can use any server. Really, there are just a few requirements. For example, it has to be an Intel CPU, and you need to use a network interface card that's based on the Intel chipset. But that's just about all of the requirements or the prerequisites for FreeSBC. And so they're deploying this server with FreeSBC on customer premises, and they're using the call rate limiting features of FreeSBC to enforce the service level agreement that they have with their call center customer. And the installation, and this is solving one of the challenges they had, is the simplicity of the installation. Installing FreeSBC is very easy on any computing platform, and in fact, on a bare metal server, you just download an image of FreeSBC and you install it in the server, and it just takes a few minutes. The CentOS 7 operating system installs, the FreeSBC software installs, and it goes ahead and discovers the network interfaces, and you're ready to configure.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and we closed out with some feedback from Sergio Lopez, the engineering manager, and he reinforced how important it was that this one-step installation was critical for him, especially because he was sending the technicians out to do this install where the equipment and the software met up at the customer site, and he didn't want them to be there any longer than they need to be. So it was important for his deployment. So a great story, a great story. That's it from here. I thank everyone for spending the time with us, and wish everyone a really great day today. So thanks again.